There's also problems for American companies, importing companies, shops, and so on can get their hands on the produce they were used to. Prices were going up. The American economy itself was suffering.
Now, the US and China have reached an agreement to cut tariffs on each other for 90 days. Here's the US Secretary of the Treasury announcing the deal after talks in Geneva.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and substantially move down the tariff levels. Both sides on the reciprocal tariffs will move their tariffs down 115%.
Well, the de-escalation of the two countries' trade war will see US levies on Chinese imports drop to 30%, while Chinese tariffs on American goods will fall to 10%. I'm John now from Beijing, by the Times of China correspondent Richard Spencer. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Hugo.
Thank you for being with us. How damaging were American tariffs for China and Chinese industry?
They were very damaging for both sides, or threatened to be very damaging. Some damage already caused. Yeah, there were definitely already layoffs at Chinese factories that specialized in making goods for the American market, whether that was sort of toys or clothes. You may remember that Apple moved very quickly to try and boost its factories in India to take advantage of the lower tariffs there. 90% of Apple's production, all our iPhones and laptops and so on, are all made in China, and including for the American market. So there was a big risk for China. But of course, there's also problems for American companies, importing companies, shops, and so on can get their hands on the produce they were used to. Prices were going up. The American economy itself was suffering. So it was a big problem for both sides.
And how should we interpret what's happened now? Is this one side backing down? Is this both sides seeing sense? How would you look at it?
I mean, it's to me, it's hard not to see this as President Trump backing down. He said he was going to totally restructure trade between America and China. It was going to be, an end to American reliance on China. Just to break down that 30% figure you mentioned, that 30% includes a 20% punitive tariff Trump put on before this whole tariff war started, as a punishment for China's exports of drugs that are used to make fentanyl. That was a big rallying cry for the Trump election campaign, that he was going to stop the fentanyl trade. And it's true that Chinese companies have been exporting some of the precursor chemicals, and China's promised to crack down on that. Trump said it didn't do enough. Now, interestingly, the Chinese police minister was in Geneva for these talks as well. We think he was talking to the American representatives. So if he makes enough pledges and gets that 20% knocked off as well, then you're back to where you are with Britain and everywhere else, who currently has 10% baseline interim tariffs from America. So it looks like an end to that attempt to decouple Chinese and American trade. And indeed, Scott Bessent, the U.S. Treasury, said we are officially, as of now, no longer trying to decouple American and Chinese trade. So given all those promises about ending America's dependence on China, it looks to me like Trump's backing down.
I mean, obviously, this is supposed to be a 90-day pause. Would we expect this to continue after the 90 days in that case?
Yeah, I mean, as with all the other tariffs, if you remember the tariffs he put on all the other countries, I'm trying to remember taking some statistics from the top of my head. I think it was 56% on Vietnam and 24% on India, talking from memory, and similar figures in the mid-20s for Japan and South Korea, all these big exporting countries. They're all on pause rather than dropped altogether. It's hard to see them going back on again, though in theory they could. The important thing long term is that America and China have both said they've now established a talks mechanism whereby trade issues can be discussed and measures put in place over the long term to reduce this massive trade deficit America has with China, which to be fair to President Trump, is something that many economists agree has been a destabilizing factor both for the American economy and indeed the global economy. So that's the long-term promise that will it seems, stop these tariffs being put back on again.
Finally, Richard, how's this being treated in China? Is this being seen as an American climb down there?
So they've been very careful not to put out any sort of gloaty statements. It's also a bit of a climb down for Xi Jinping. I mean, he said, we'll fight on, we'll fight to win. He said we'll fight these tariffs. Pretty much on the beaches, on the landing grounds. Very, very tough talk from him, and he had to send his vice premier to go and do a deal. He didn't want to see, hundreds of thousands of Chinese workers laid off. So they're playing it calm. They've issued a simple statement laying out the facts of what's happened, saying we hope that America doesn't ever again, do these unilateral tariffs like Trump has done, but it hasn't claimed victory as such. I think there will be a little bit of gloating quietly behind closed doors, because what was pledged to be a sort of massive war to end China's rise is clearly not going to happen now. And there's been a bit of humor as well. Just to give you a little funny story, the Chinese state TV's film channel was going to be showing "We Love You, New York," that film, at prime time tonight, and there were lots of jokes about this on social media, saying probably rightly that this wouldn't have been allowed if there hadn't been a trade deal, and eventually Chinese state TV was so embarrassed it's actually cancelled that showing, and it's going to show an Italian movie instead. But there's been a fair bit of humor about all this, as everywhere else when it comes to Trump.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard Spencer. Richard is the Times' China correspondent, speaking to us there from Beijing.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and substantially moved down the tariff levels. Both sides on the reciprocal tariffs will move their tariffs down 115%. We had very robust discussions. Both sides showed great respect. Throughout the trade process, we have had a plan. We have a process in place, and now with the Chinese, after this weekend, we have a mechanism for continued talks. So, process, plan, and mechanism. I would say one of the big takeaways from this weekend, the United States will continue a strategic rebalancing in many areas that were exposed as supply chain weaknesses during COVID, whether it's medicines, whether it's semiconductors, steel, we've identified 5 or 6 strategic industries and supply chain vulnerabilities, and we will continue moving toward U.S. independence or reliable supplies from allies on those. But the consensus from both delegations this weekend is neither side wants a decoupling. And what had occurred with these very high tariffs, as Ambassador Greer said, was the equivalent of an embargo, and neither side wants that. We do want trade. We want more balanced trade, and I think that both sides are committed to achieving that.